Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Scrutiny Committee. Just to note, there's no Gaelic translation available this morning for this meeting. I'd like to welcome you all in the chamber, online, and our colleagues in Audit Scotland. I hope you can all hear me, those of you online. Someone say yes.
Thank
you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. Could you please ensure that your microphones are off? And before we begin, I'm going to ask Councillor Duncan McInnes to lead us in prayer, and the meeting has now been recorded. We have given infrastructure any of us today for chair and vice chair of this wisdom and the direction of the travel to ensure that all the what we pray for Autumn, Cavalier, all the directors. Oh Lord, we give thanks this particular time. Services that are provided by the over such challenging time. Based on running at levels that we haven't seen. The impact that that's having all sectors of it. All local authorities. Functions for this. Lord, we give thanks for wisdom and guidance that you have given to members listening to staff in previous years. Ensure that adequate research would make sure that when the perfect storm arrived, Lord, we think of the many in the community that think east for east. Lord, we thank the council for funding that they have provided, ensure that the most vulnerable. Lord, we pray and both the many tears that have come out, ensure that the one hubs that have been developed right through service and even of in those times when only in the what we ask. Thank you, Councillor McInnes, and apologies for those of you online who didn't hear the prayer. So moving on now, you're all familiar now with the conduct of the meeting. I won't go through the lines, for your microphones, but you're all well versed with them by now. I will remind members of declaration of interest though, and members must leave the chamber or end the call remotely in regards to any declarations of interest. The meeting has now been recorded, as I said previously, and will be made available on the CONUS website following the meeting. Item 12 will be taken in private at the end of the meeting, and prior to moving into private, participants other than the relevant officers and members of the committee will be asked to leave the meeting. Now we move on to our agenda. Item 1 is the minutes of the meeting of the 26th October 2022, and that's for approval. Agreed, thank you. Item 2, declaration of interest. As I said, members are asked to declare any interest they have in any items on the agenda. It will be helpful if members express why they are declaring an interest in the item concerned. Members in the chamber, please do so now by pressing your microphone on or remotely through Teams by using the raise hand function. I'm not seeing any declarations of interest either in the chamber or online. And I could just remind people to please ensure the declaration is repeated prior to the relevant item and you adhere to the protocol as previously indicated should there be any declarations. Item 3, service improvement. This is the Best Value Continuous Improvement Action Plan report by the Chief Executive. This report details the progress with the Continuous Improvement Action Plan and presents the key findings for effective challenge and scrutiny. The Continuous Improvement Action Plan summary is appended to the report, and I would like to remind members that they have access to Interplan and can view the progress of service business plans and continuous improvement action plans throughout the year. I'm now going to ask Mrs. Fiona Nape, Senior Organisational Development Officer, to speak to the report, and relevant officers are present if there are any questions of detail on this to be answered. So, Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. The Continuous Improvement Action Plan is a way of tracking what is happening with the outstanding recommendations from audits and self-assessments, and helps the Corla fulfil its SPI 2 best value duty as per the Accounts Commission's direction, to demonstrate how the Corla have responded to audit assessments and to ensure a balance in reporting areas of improvement that have and have not been achieved. This report provides a view of outstanding items as at the 30th of September 2022. There are 17 CIAP actions in comparison to 28 in the previous report, and the key findings are summarised in the report by department and service rather than by the local government benchmarking framework themes as in previous reports. And the names of the officers responsible for taking the actions forward to completion are appended to the report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Fiona, for that. And like I said, the relevant officers are present if any members have any questions. But before I do, I'm going to ask Mr. Sandy Gomez, are you happy with the plan? Because we've got 2 or 3 items in red, but I see there's revised completion dates into 2023. Are you happy with the progress done to date, Mr. Gomez?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'm happy with the progress to date and have been in discussion with Fiona about previous actions that were almost complete and are likely to come up in future reviews as part of the new strategic plan. So I'm happy with the way things are going at the moment.
That's good. Thank you very much for that. Members, do you have any questions for either Ms. Nape or for the relevant officers? Councillor Gordon Murray.
Thank you, Chair. This is on the best value, isn't it? Okay. I was just reading, it was interesting to see 5.319 that council's total funding and income increased by 1.8 billion. And then to read 5.4 that we've received a 14.6% decrease in real terms, whereas other councillors on average have had a 5.6% cut. Now, this is due to the funding formula, I would believe, in the settlement and distribution group. And I want to ask, has the Corla always agreed that funding formula when it serves us so badly?
Maybe ask the Chief Executive to answer that question. Councillor Murray, Chief Executive.
I wouldn't say that any individual council agrees the funding formula. It's a negotiation between COSLA and it was probably Scottish Executive when that formula was agreed. I think every council in Scotland would say, for good or ill, that the funding formula no longer reflects the realities of local government life, and it's long due for renegotiation. There is always, of course, the risk that from any renegotiation that there will be winners and losers unless the overall funding pot goes up, and that I think is more the question. It is the total sum available to local government for distribution under the formula, which has fallen in recent years from about a third of the national cake now to 24% of the national cake, I'm told, whereas NHS funding, of course, has generally increased in exactly the same to exactly the same degree. So it depends on 2 things. Of course, it depends on the funding formula, but it also depends on the total sum available for distribution under that formula. But generally, the formula rewards population growth, and that is why the average is about 5.6%. We have seen population stability, but not population growth, and whereas other areas, particularly in the southeast of Scotland and Fife, have seen quite substantial population growth for which the funding formula takes account. But it's a complicated subject, but it's certainly long overdue. I think it's long overdue for review. I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Councillor Murray, were you? No.
Chair, I'm a bit confused because I think on October the 28th there was an opportunity for councils to put forward. It was discussed at COSLA. The settlement and distribution group paper was put up, but there was no. So that if there's no amendment or change or alternative going forward, then surely it's safe to assume that all councils agree that, and the fact that the finance minister has asked on countless occasions for alternatives. But as the Chief Executive said, there are different elements to the funding, and if you factor in the ring-fenced funding that we get, we're actually the second highest revenue per head. So it's just with the funding formula, I'm surprised that we're not putting our making our voice heard at COSLA or raising amendments at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Can I ask the Chief Executive to come in?
Well, we certainly make our voice heard at COSLA on the inadequacies of funding for the Corla, and that is one of the reasons why part of our funding settlement includes Special Islands Needs Allowance, which was introduced in the 1990s, recognising that the funding formula needed to be supplemented for islands. I don't think the funding formula itself has ever been on the COSLA agenda in living memory. Settlement and Distribution Group looks at new pots of money or revised schemes and looks at how they are best distributed, and that is often more favourable to us than if they were distributed according to the overall funding formula. In fact, I think that makes the point about the inadequacy of the funding formula, that the Settlement and Distribution Group has to take a different look at each and any new funding that comes along to adjust the distribution. And we certainly have quite a lot of influence on that. The most recent example was the 1.4 million announced for additional support to alleviate the cost of living crisis. There are big debates about rurality, about islandness, about all other factors there, but the overall funding formula has not, as far as I'm aware, been on the table in recent years. The Chief Finance Officer, if he's here, may be able to advise if there's any moves in that direction.
Thank you, Chief Executive. I think the Chief Finance Officer actually we're able to dial in. I think, could we maybe dial?
Just while we're waiting for that, Chair, the per capita funding is members will see all the islands councils, the 3 islands councils are the highest per capita recipients of funding, but of course that in a way I see that as a fairly meaningless figure, because it simply reflects that the costs of providing education and other services here are much greater owing to smaller schools and distributed population. It will generally be found that rural areas and islands will be the highest per capita recipients because the population is more scattered and services have to be delivered across a wider area.
Thank you. That's, I think Mr. MacDonald is available now, and just ask the Chief Executive then to direct that point to him when he does come in. You there, Norman?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, the debate at the moment is about the overall funding formula, and I'd indicated I wasn't aware that there were any proposals for review of the formula, while acknowledging in our view it needs to be reviewed, but perhaps directors of finance are more cited on that than I.
I'm not aware of any immediate plans for a review. There's definitely been nothing discussed at any of the meetings of the directors of finance that have been at, but of course these things are always on the cards, you know.
Councillor Murray, you want to?
Just finally, I know that maybe that it hasn't been up for review, but should we not instigate that? Have we not got the power to do that at these meetings? I think we do. And why are we not doing it?
Chief Executive.
Well, that is really a political question, but COSLA could initiate a review, but of course it takes two parties to wish to review it, and there are a lot of political considerations, as I've said, about what would be the parameters of that review. Would it be the current amount of funding, in which case perhaps there would be less appetite for review. If it's just redistributing a cake that has reduced steadily over years, that's perhaps not so appealing. But yes, COSLA and Scottish Government would require to agree on a review, and it is certainly long overdue from our perspective, but I think the other questions are probably more political in nature.
Could we maybe action it as, I mean, like maybe the Chief Executive and the leader could take to COSLA and push the review up the ladder, maybe? That's something that could be done. Councillor Murray, you want to?
I think it's too late for that, Chair. I think the option or the opportunity was on the 28th of October. That I would have said that was the time and the place to put some sort of amendment forward for that. Thanks.
Chief Executive.
I'm sorry, Chair, I'm not. There was an item on settlement and distribution on the COSLA agenda of 28th October, if my memory serves me right, but that's often the case. I don't think it was. It referred to the general funding formula, but certainly at officer level, I can make inquiries of COSLA, but the matter is primarily a political issue. If the political groups on COSLA wish to initiate a review, then that is something they will take forward through leaders, and then for discussion with the Scottish Government.
Thank you. Councillor Murray, just to try and bring this point.
Sorry, just to thank the Chief Executive for that clarification that it is a political choice that we do agree the funding formula. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Not a member of your committee. Yes, absolutely, it's a political point, and if Councillor Murray would like to raise it, I'm glad he's raised it today. I can take that forward to the independent group and just see what their thoughts are there. See if there's a political will to take it forward. So
Thanks, appreciate that, leaders. Thank you. Okay, any further comments or observations before we note the report? Okay, so sorry, Councillor McLean.
In regard to what Mr. Murray is proposing, do we need a proposal from this group here today to go forward, or do we wait for advice from Chief Executive or the Chief Financial Officer? Where do we go? We can leave this as it is, but we've made no decision. So I think we should make some decision, because it would appear that many of us have looked at the formula and at what the Chief Executive has said today. It seems to be a bit skewed and against us. But then I take it from what he says as well. He's almost on the horns of a dilemma sometimes by going that way and losing out in another way. If I'm reading it into the situation, but should we be looking for advice as to where we should go politically? Because I think that we should be moving forward. If you're just going to leave it as a noting, you're making no decision as to what you're doing.
Well, I'll ask the Chief Executive, just finally on this Chief Executive, you just clarify the point.
Chair, procedurally, there's nothing for this council to do, because it's a political matter for the leader to take forward, as he said, with the independent group and then with the other party groups on COSLA. There is nothing this council can do to seek a review of the formula other than to support its review, which I think we've already done. There is a wider issue about local government funding, and the letter from Directors of Finance, which I circulated to you all this morning, makes that starkly clear. You will see in that letter many of the points which we've made ourselves in recent years and in recent days. But the formula is a political negotiation between government and COSLA representing all councils, and it is equally important as the formula itself is the sum that's available for distribution. That of course too is a political question. So the leader will follow that up, as he said, through his own political mechanisms, and I will take it up with the Chief Executive of COSLA to see if there's any action in that regard.
Leader, you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, I will bring it up definitely with our group, but I'll put out the warning, as Councillor Murray pointed out, we do get quite good returns at the moment. We are the second highest, so, there's potential that we could lose out. So just so people are aware of that.
Okay, so members agree to approve the recommendation as paragraph 3.1. Yeah, okay, thank you. We move on to item 4 now, scrutiny. And the scrutiny element of our agenda, this is the National Fraud Initiative update. Again, a report by the Chief Finance Officer this time. This report is for noting and provides the committee with an update with the final performance position for the 2020-2021 National Fraud Initiative and details of the planning for the 2022-23 exercise. The 2022-23 exercise has now commenced and a plan is in place, which allocates responsibility for the provision of data and investigation of matches. Mr. Norm MacDonald is able to attend through Teams and can be called into the meeting if members have any specific questions. Members have any questions for Mr. MacDonald, or do we agree to note this report? Questions? We agree to note it. Thank you. Item 5, Scottish Public Service Ombudsman Annual Letter 2021-22. This report by the Chief Executive is for noting and details the outcomes of the SPSO Annual Letter for 2021-22. As indicated in the report, the Corps has demonstrated continuous improvement with its approach to complaints through improved communication with complainants and learning from complaints. The SPSO closed 7 complaints against the Corps in 2021-22, and in terms of outcome, 1 complaint was fully investigated and upheld. And Norma Skinner is available to answer any questions. Do members have any questions from Ms. Skinner on this report? Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Just to commend this to members' attention. I mean, it's very good that our level of complaints, not that we should worry about complaints, because we deal with difficult areas of discretion in services which affect individuals' lives. So I mean, complaints I think are inevitable and can be helpful in many ways. But you don't want many of them, and it's good to see that that the level hasn't increased in any way. And all bar one have not proceeded to a finding against the services. So it's a very good report, and
absolutely. Thank you, Chief Executive. Thank you. Skinner, do you want to come? You're happy? Yeah. Okay. Members, no comments. Nobody want to ask any questions? No. Okay. Members agree to note the annual letter for 2021-22 from the Scottish Public Service Ombudsman in respect of complaints to the SPSO about the coroner. Agreed. Thank you. We now move on to internal audit matters. Item 6 on your agenda. This is the internal audit progress report. This report is by Mr. Gomez, the Chief Internal Auditor, and it summarised the internal audit activity for the period 1st April 2022 to 8th November 2022. And I would like now ask Mr. Sandy Gomez to speak to the report. Mr. Gomez.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, this report is just an update on internal audit activities to date from the previous approved operational plan. Section 3 states the work that's currently in progress. There's also one active investigation, which police report has recently concluded, so I'm hope that this will be before you, perhaps February. There's one follow-up, which is part of the agenda, and just to point out that the appendix to the report is just a snapshot of where we are with the operational plan at the moment. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the update, Mr. Gomez. Members, any questions? Councillor Gordon-Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Just to welcome Mr. Gomez. It's the first time I'm through the chair, of course. I was wondering, where were we in terms of recruiting another member of the internal audit team? I know that there's quite a huge workload that they have to consider all the time. So is that possible to get an update?
I'll maybe ask Mr. Gomez just to give an update.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm sure members are aware, recruitment in the finance sector is incredibly challenging. We have gone out to recruit, but not had any successful applicants at the moment. Hoping to go out again in the new year, and optimistic that hopefully something can be found to help Because it is a challenge with the resources that we have at the moment, and we do need to get back to a full team as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Thank you. So members agreed to note the report. Thank you. We're now moving to internal audit completed reviews. The following 4 items on your agenda relate to the final reports as part of the operational audit plans for 2022-23. And the first one is item 7, which is emergency planning. This is a report by the Chief Internal Auditor in respect to the review of emergency planning undertaken in August-September this year. The Civil Contingencies Act is a framework that places several duties on local authorities to assess the risks of an emergency occurring and publish a community risk register. And Mr. Sandy Gomez will address the audit findings, and Norma Skinner is present to address any specific points or questions. Mr. Gomez. Oh, sorry, it's Ms. Macaulay.
Thank you, Chair. If I can get members to turn to page 3 of the report, our concluding remarks. We've highlighted a few areas there that require to be addressed by management. And again, on page 5, our recommendations, we've got 2 graded amber. This is a requirement for departments to complete their continuity plans in time. And if you turn to page 15, our recommendations, all the recommendations have been agreed with dates of implementation. And 2.4, reference 2.4 for the business continuity plans, emails were sent out on the 1st of December to all heads of service to ensure that they return their business continuity plans by the end of December. Any questions?
Thank you, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just take this opportunity to note that the job of Mr. Mackay and colleagues is to remind and inform heads of service that they have to prioritise and complete a business continuity plan. It's not for resilience to do that for them. It's for us to coordinate to ensure that business continuity plans are there, and then to organise the training. So that is something, if that we will monitor that very closely, because it's important that there are completed and realistic business continuity plans for all services across the corner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Executive. So with that, do members agree to note the report? Agreed, thank you. Item 8 is financial assessments. This is a report again by the Chief Internal Auditor in respect to the review of financial assessments undertaken in June, July 2022. The Cone is required by statute to review its charges for residential accommodation for adults each year. Each care home resident has a full assessment of their financial circumstances each year, which determines the amount they are required to contribute to the cost of their care. And Mr. Gomez will address the audit findings, and Norman MacDonald may be called into the meeting if there are any specific questions. Mr. Gomez, first of all. Oh, sorry, it's Ms. Macaulay. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. If I can get members to turn to page 3, our concluding remarks at 1.5. Just a couple of issues coming out of this review, and the most significant one we have is the resourcing. There's two part-time members of staff in this area with a circa of 200 current service users. And when we consider that this is an area of significant income for the Corla, it requires to be looked at. And again, on page 5, our recommendations, they've all been accepted. We've highlighted the resource as our red. And if you turn to page 17, all the recommendations have been implemented in our action plan, and dates of implementation have been put in. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Macaulay. And again, there's management comments in the action plan for members as well. So members agree to note the report. Sorry, Councillor McLean.
Yeah, in the red action plan there, it's to do with resourcing, staff resourcing. What action has been taken to alleviate this, if there has been any?
Macaulay.
Can I get Mr. MacDonald to come in on this, please?
Certainly, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This area would also be followed up in 6 months' time, so we don't really have an answer for you till then, but I'm sure Mr MacDonald will be able to help.
Yeah, there seems to be 2 part-time staff for 200 is a, would you agree, Chair?
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of responsibility in that for.
I would say so.
Yeah. We've been able to get. Hello, Mr. MacDonald, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, the question is in relation to 2.4 on the staffing. It's a red action on the financial assessment report. And I'll ask Councillor McLean to repeat his question again to you. Councillor McLean.
Yeah. It would appear that 2 part-time members of staff here would seem to be a bit on the low side. What action has been taken to alleviate this problem?
Mr. MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. Well, when we took the service over from Health and Social Care, 1 full-time equivalent of member of staff passed over. So that's basically the establishment for the financial assessment service. So we have supplemented it from within the revenues and benefits team as and when required, but generally there's at least half another post going towards that. At the moment, that's all. That's the only budget I can free up for that.
Thank you, Mr. MacDonald. And again, like Ms. McCauley said, this will come before us again in 6 months' time. So hopefully we'll see, you know, if there are any issues arising from that report and follow up. Thank you. Any further members, or do we agree to note the report? Thank you. Item 9 now is Learning Disabilities and Autism Service. This is a report again by the Chief Internal Auditor. It's the final review of the Learning Disabilities and Autism Service carried out in September this year. The review covers 3 specific establishments which cater for service users who have learning disabilities and autism. Our Treeloch Care Home and Day Centre provides living in accommodation for people with learning disabilities and autism. Greenan Resource Centre provides a daycare support service to adults with learning disabilities and autism and is open 6 days a week. Carlway Day Centre offers support and recreation for users and for a respite for families. Now, again, before I say what's in front of me, I take it as Chrissy McCauley again that's going to speak to the report. Chrissy.
Thank you, Chair. If I can get members to look at our concluding remarks, page 4, 1.5, these are the main issues coming out of the review. And again, page 6 and 7, our recommendations and our gradings. We've graded 2 as amber. They were health and safety issues. And I can report that the slings issues has now been rectified. And if you turn to page 18 and 19, the action plan for our recommendations with implementation dates going forward. Any questions?
Thank you again, colleague. Members, Gordon Murray.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for this report. I don't think this is a question for Mrs. McCauley, but it's basically the recommendations. I wanted to ask that there would be no budget proposals in the forthcoming budget setting that would invalidate some of these recommendations or make them difficult to proceed with, and the related management comments as well.
That's something we would need to take up, obviously, through the budget process, Councillor Murray, you know, followed on. It's political choice really for that, so we can't determine that today, unfortunately. Okay, with that, do members agree to note the report? Agreed, thank you.
Thank you.
We move on now to item 10. This is ship delivery, which is in collaboration with HHP. This report by the Chief Internal Auditor, again a final review of the ship delivery in collaboration with HHP carried out in October 2022. The ship's strategic housing investment plan is required by the Scottish Government setting out the Corners affordable housing investment priorities in relation to the aims and objectives of its local housing strategy. The ship is collaborated with Aberdeen Housing Partnership, HHP, as the main registered social landlord in the Outer Hebrides, as well as with collaboration with Scottish Government's More Homes Scotland team, Taoiseach Gaul and other relevant parties as required. And Mr. Sandy Gomez will address the audit findings. And Mr. Ian Watson, I'm pleased to say, is present with us to update us in relation to alternative delivery options. First of all, Mr. Gomez.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, this report is around the control environment surrounding the ship delivery. Section 1.5 has our concluding remarks, which feeds into Section 2 recommendations. Just 3 recommendations for this report. And Section 3 of the action plan with the dates of implementation. So overall, our opinion is that there's a substantial level of assurance around the control environment, and happy to take any questions on it.
Thank you. Thanks. Before we ask, Mr. Watson, would you like to give us maybe an update on where we are with it, with the ship, in relation to the alternative delivery mechanism?
Thanks very much, Chair. There's, as members will be aware from discussions at other committees about the potential use of the funding that the Scottish Government provide. There's been ongoing discussions with locally between ourselves and HSP, looking at possible ways of maximising the spend. But there's also been ongoing discussions with officers from the Scottish Government and also with ministers. And I understand this week the Deputy Chief Executive met with the Cabinet Secretary with responsibility for housing. So again, these discussions are ongoing. The most recent opportunity to use some money in a different way relates to a project to bring empty homes back into use, and some members will recall the discussion at Sustainable Development about the plan there. That is to bring long-term empty homes back into use using the Scottish Government funding, so the council could purchase these properties and then either rent them out or sell them to people in housing need. The second approach we've got is a national scheme called the Partnership Support for Regeneration, where local developers and builders could get funding from the Scottish Government to build houses for sale. And we've been in discussion with a number of local companies who are keen on looking to see if that model would work on the island. So hopefully over the next few months we'll have a better idea about that, and would like to, fingers crossed, we'd see some developments taking off next financial year when the ship goes live, if you like. So there is some scope for using the money creatively and maybe more appropriately for the island situation, but the discussions with politicians and officers is ongoing as well to try and see what other flexibility we can get. Happy to get any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. So Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if this is the appropriate forum to bring this up, but do the Scottish Government have any input into the allocation of houses on this island or on these islands?
I'll ask Mr. Watson, just see, we're on the ship side of things, but Mr. Watson, do you want to just clarify that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. No, the Scottish Government don't. The allocation, the approach to allocations of social housing is left to the organisation that owns the houses. So locally that would be Hebridean Housing. Previously, when we had council houses, there was a council that devised the allocation strategy. But the strategy locally is prepared by Hebridean Housing. They review it every couple of years to take account of changing national policy and local circumstances. And they give us an opportunity to feedback into the consultation for that. But in general, the organisation that has control of the houses sets up the allocations policy. So the Scottish Government wouldn't be involved directly with the allocation of properties.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Murray? Do you want to come back in?
The reason I ask, and I don't mean to hit you with a low bowler, I have a constituent who has been advised by HHP that the reason that constituent could not be allocated a house was that the decision was taken in Edinburgh.
Could I ask that maybe you could have a discussion out with the meeting with Mr. Watson on that, and maybe we can bring that forward for your constituent. Thank you. Members, any other questions on the ship? No. Okay, members are keen to note the report. We now move on to a follow-up report, an internal audit follow-up report. We've got one today in front of us, which we've asked to be brought back to us at every committee series. This is for dual libraries. It's item number 11. Again, this report by the Chief Internal Auditor provides an update on the implementation of 14 recommendations arising from the report considered at the committee on 22nd September 2022. The follow-up confirmed that 8 out of the 14 recommendations have been fully implemented, and management have confirmed that the remaining recommendations are ongoing. And it's good to see that we have had progress on this since we had it at our last committee. I'm going to ask Mr. Gomez to speak to the report and answer any questions. Mr. Gomez.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just to echo your comments, section 1.4 shows the original recommendations from the report. As you mentioned, 8 have been fully implemented of the original 14, so which again shows good progress. Section 2 shows the progress to date, and as the Chair mentioned, we'll continue to follow it up and bring it back to the next committee series. Thanks.
Could I just ask on one of the reds that we've got going forward, I take it that with an employee leaving, without going into any detail of the employee that's leaving, the item that is red, settlement of unpaid expenses or time.
We've still had no further update on that recommendation at the moment, but that is ongoing, something I'm in ongoing discussions with the director of it.
And I believe that will be done before the employee leaves.
It's my understanding.
And that will come back to us, obviously, because we will keep asking for this to come back. And like I said, we have had good progress. Hopefully by the time it comes back to us in February, we'll maybe have concluded these and got the reds into greens, hopefully. Thank you. Okay, any members, any questions? No? We agree to note this report then. Thank you. Sorry, sorry, online, Councillor Finnegan.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to say that we'll be good to see that it's coming back every time. It sort of keeps us on our toes in education. So it's like we'll be having a MAUG in January and looking at reviewing the whole system and seeing what we can do. Just to make it known, obviously that we're taking the service on quite recently, and obviously effectively it's a new service for us. So it's in terms of financial challenges, obviously there's going to be quite a few. So. But we'll be clearly working on it. So, and hopefully we'll have things better than they are now for February. Thanks.
Thank you for that assurance, Councillor Finnegan. Thank you. Before we go into private, we move to item 13. It's performance monitoring, reports outstanding. And again, this is just for noting, and it's updated after every meeting. So it's just for noting. There's dates against all the actions anyway. So. Okay, so it's noted. Okay, so we're now going to private. Just give a couple of seconds for